Today our parashat is Shemini. And it begins, it shall come to pass, or it came to pass on the 8th day. But what had happened during the prior 7 days? For that, we have to go back to the last parashat, Tzav, where Aaron and his 4 sons were told not to leave the tent for 7 days and 7 nights. For in there, they would go through a training period, which would end with their inauguration into the newly established priesthood. It was a day that was filled with ceremony. There was excitement. There was joy. This new nation of Israel would attend an elaborate ceremony where Moshe would anoint the Kohanim, these new priesthood, with oil. He was consecrating, separating them for their special roles to be the link between God and the rest of the people. Now Moshe said, "This is what the Lord commanded you to do. And the gavod, the glory of God, shall appear before you." And a fire came from before the Lord and consumed the olot, the burnt offerings, and the people saw and fell on their faces. What a day. Amazing. It was an awe-inspiring scene, but it was immediately followed by a horrendous one, where Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's 2 older sons, offered Eish Zarah, strange fire to the Lord, which he had not commanded them to do, and they died there before the Lord. Then Moses said to Aaron, "I will be separated from the other gods, for those who approach me and my people shall see my glory." Now, this theme of being separated is crucial to understanding Vayikra, Leviticus. Not only was the Borei Olam to be separated from any other god, but the Israelites were to be separated from all the idolatrous nations. They were to lead the way for humanity to know that there is only one creator of everyone and everything. I just thought also here too, the Kohanim were being separated from the rest of the people, for we had originally been called to be, all of Israel was supposed to be the Kohanim. It was to be a priesthood. But here it was going to be Aaron and his sons, because we had worshipped the golden calf. Now Aaron, of course, was devastated, but he remained silent. Moshe got upset with him because he refused to perform the rest of the liturgical service. But when he explained to Moshe that he couldn't, because that would have been hypocritical, Moses understood. And this shows us that our God understands and he cares about our feelings. He's not rigid or religious like those who are more worried about how they appear to others than showing themselves for who they are. The Creator knows our hearts, our intentions. We can't fool God. He knows when we are being hypocrites. He is more interested in our moral behavior than in empty religious external display. It seems as if the punishment of Nadab and Abihu was far greater than they deserved, but they were in line for this newly established priesthood, and as such, they were called to a higher standard. They would be setting the precedent for all who would follow. There's nothing wrong with tradition when it enhances God's words in the Torah, but the danger lies when it replaces them. In the writings of Matityahu, Matthew 15, we read that Yeshua argued with the Perushim, the Pharisees, about this very thing. When they asked him, "Why do your Talmidim break away from the traditions of the elders?" he answered a question with a question, and most good Jews do. And he said, "Why do you break away from the commandments of God for the sake of your traditions? For God said, 'Honor your father and your mother,' and anyone who curses his father or mother will be put to death." He was directly quoting Deuteronomy Devarim 5:16. He was always turning us back to the Torah. But you say, if anyone says to his father or mother, Anything I might have used to help you is dedicated to God. He is rid of his duty to his father and mother. In this way, you have made God's word ineffective by means of your tradition. Yeshua was constantly directing his people's attention back to the written Torah, unlike the religious leaders of the day who prioritized values by saying that if anyone made a vow, whether it was a just one or not, it had to be kept. In so doing, they were invalidating the word of the Creator. Yeshua continues, "You are hypocrites. How rightly Isaiah prophesied about you when he said, 'These people honor me with only lip service, while their hearts are far from me. Their reverence of me is worthless. The lessons they teach are nothing but human commandments.'" In the same way that Nadab and Abihu were setting up a tradition that would replace God's commandments, so many of today's religions do, not just Judaism. The regulations in Leviticus were never meant to be observed literally or legalistically. Rather, they set down precedents for our behavior. In this case, to examine our intentions before we do anything, which we might justify by saying that they're for the Lord. We need to examine our intentions constantly when we do these. And when we fail, we go back to our God. We need to say, are our intentions tahor, which means clean, or tameh, unclean? Are they true, or are we being hypocrites? Now, this is related to the last chapter of this parasha, chapter 11, that deals with the foods, which are considered tahor and tameh, clean and unclean. We begin with the Lord speaking to Moses. "Speak to the sons of Israel, saying, 'These are the living things which you may eat among all the beasts of the earth.'" There's only one verse that describes the animals they could eat. "They that have a cloven hoof and who chewed the cud," while there are several injunctions for what they could not eat. I wondered why. Why are there so much more for what we couldn't eat? What was it about those particular animals at that time that the Hebrews would be prohibited from eating, but not the rest of humanity? Were they poison? Did God hate the rest of his creation? This is followed by a detailed account of which birds, which fish, and crawling things were unclean, tameh. And the words used to describe them are detestable, an abomination. The more I read them, the more it occurred to me that these things just don't make any sense. For example, anyone who touches a lizard, a snail, a chameleon, a gecko, shall be unclean until evening. I looked it up. Is there anything wrong with the skin of those things? Were they poison? And there was nothing wrong with them. So I thought maybe these regulations must be chukim. Those are the regulations which we simply have to obey, but we don't understand them. There are certainly many opinions about them, but I thought there must be something deeper at the spiritual level which we can't understand and we can't know. And I thought more and more, I thought about it. I said, these must be the key. What I'm going to read next must be the key to understanding it. Now, these are the verses with the theme again of being separated and being clean and unclean. So let's start with Leviticus 10. It says, "I will be separated from the other gods for those who approach me." And in Leviticus 11, 44 and 46, it says, "I am the Lord your God. Therefore you shall separate yourselves, and you shall be holy, separated, for I am holy." And chapter 45 says, For I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. Therefore be separated, holy as I am holy. And verse 46 says, this is the Torah of the beasts, the birds, of every living thing, to differentiate between tameh and tahor, unclean and clean, and what may be eaten and what may not be eaten. It may sound a little confusing, but then I remembered what Rabbi taught us. He taught us several things. First, the scriptures always explain themselves. And we need to look at to whom were they speaking and when was this happening? And then we need to stand back and search for the greater picture. Then a flash of understanding hit me. The idea of the words detestable and abomination, which were so strong for those things. And it reminded me that the best way to get the people of that time who were steeped in idolatry and superstition to obey might just be through fear. Now, there were two stories that were examples of this. Remember the story of the Sotah, the wife of the jealous husband, who he suspected of committing adultery. He had to bring it to the Kohen, who mixed up a drink of the ashes of the red heifer, which she had to drink. If nothing happened when she drank it, she was innocent. But if she were guilty, the warning was that her insides and her thighs were swelled up to bursting, and she could no longer have children. The idea was that if she was guilty, she would refuse to drink, and the truth would become obvious. She was so superstitious that she would believe a balagan like that, and it would show her the truth. She was afraid. She was superstitious. And another example in the Torah was the regulation that the man was not to touch his wife during her 7 days of menstruation, or he would become unclean, tameh, and would not be able to enter the temple. Remember, the people were superstitious. This idea still holds today among the Orthodox Jews, many of whom are so superstitious. I remember, one of the things they teach us is that you put the mezuzah on your door, and the people who are so religious, they walk in, and they're almost afraid if they miss it because of superstition, their house would be cursed. In this case, it had nothing to do with the woman being dirty. The Orthodox Jews won't even touch our hands of the women because they're afraid we're dirty. They don't know if we have our menstruation. But this has nothing to do with that. Rather, in God's mercy, he was giving the woman a break, a time of rest during her time of her hormonal upheaval during her menstruation. And what method was used? Fear, playing into their superstitions. Through stories like this, God was slowly weaning away from the superstition that were created by idolatry, while getting them to focus slowly upon him, the invisible God. This was not going to be easy. It's so hard for people to change their belief systems, their paradigms, which have been ingrained in them over centuries. At that time, God chose certain ways of performing this, and one of these was by what the nation would and would not eat. Today, if I say I eat kosher, who cares? Except for the ultra-Orthodox Jews, not the people of the world. They don't care what we eat. If these foods were so dangerous for our health, would God, who loves all his creation, allow millions of people to be contaminated and die while only a small group of people, the Israelites, would be saved, would be clean? Doesn't make sense. This is not the picture that the Torah paints here. God was setting apart a nation through a variety of means for a time until they were well identifiable as a people. he would give these separated people, his chosen people, the 10 commandments, which they needed to obey, and they would need to bring to the rest of the world. So in this way, we would be Or L'Goyim, a light to the rest of the nations. And Yeshua, our Rabbi, he followed in the footsteps of Moses, who brought us the original 10 commandments. But Yeshua's role was to bring us back to them because we had so far gone in the opposite direction. He wasn't trying to create another religion, but he wanted us as a people to fulfill our role to the nations. We had lost that, and we still are today. Yeshua was teaching us that whatever comes out of the mouth comes from the heart, and it is this that makes someone unclean. For the heart, out of the heart, comes evil intentions, murder, adultery, fornication, theft, perjury, slander. These are the things that makes a person unclean. When God said that we were to sanctify ourselves, separate ourselves, and be holy, kadosh, which means separated, because he is separated, holy, what was he saying? He was separating himself from all the idolatrous gods, and therefore separating us as a nation from all the idolatrous nation, because he would be giving us a mission. His love for humanity is such that he wants every human being, not just Israel, to know who he is and how wonderful it is to be in relationship with him. He was forming this prototype nation who would live in such a way that others would recognize that they were not like us, and that would make them jealous enough to want to be like us. The regulations in Vayikra, in Leviticus, were for that purpose at that time. Today, our calling of being Or L'Goyim, light to the nations, is fulfilled by our moral behavior, not by what we eat or how we dress. Shabbat Shalom.